the challenge of World Health Organization. Particularly, I would like focus on to focus on the World Health crisis in COVID-19. And in the end of the speech, I would like to talk something about China's approach to World Health Organization in COVID-19 crisis. As you know, in fact, the diseases has a long history. Actually, the history of epidemic is longer than human beings. So in ancient times, how did people respond to epidemics? And they just responded to impact diseases in different ways. I think it will be different from that of today. And here I'd like to just give you some examples of how people respond to epidemics. And I think I divide the history of World Health Organization actually on international health governance institution into different kind of period. And the first period is how people respond to transnational epidemic before 1951. So why did I regard 1951 as a kind of milestone, as a kind of mark in people's, in human beings respond to global health governance? Because before 1851, and people have three ways to respond to epidemic or infectious diseases. The first one is that people, they will just pray and sacrifice and provide sacrifice to appease the hungry God. When an infectious disease just broke out, they think that, oh, the God became hungry. So they will just pray and provide sacrifice. So that is, I think that's an ancient way for people to tackle or to address epidemics. And second way for people to tackle epidemic is to just fix a cordon sanitaria. It means the people will just separate those people who were infected with some kind of infectious diseases and those healthy people. So that's this is second way. And third way is to launch a quarantine. I think it's very similar to the measures adopted by each country right now. The quarantine, actually, this kind of quarantine practice was firstly adopted in July 27, 1377. At that time, in many countries, including France, even Russia, and Italy and United Kingdom, you know, they have different quarantine practices. But most of them, they just exert such a quarantine as 40 days. So, but right now, you know, the quarantine period is about 14 days, not 40 days. But why? Why did people practice this kind of quarantine, I mean, for 40 days? And I think it's closely associated with religion. As you know, religion is very popular in Western countries, particularly in European countries. And on July 27, you know, in 1377, at that time, the black death just broke out in the 14th century. I mean, in 1377. And then, you know, those countries, they decided to designate a period that ships were required to be isolated before passenger and the crew could go ashore. Why? Because those people were afraid that if some crews, if some passengers were infected with the Black Death, and then they will have a tendency to transmit the infected disease to the local people. So before a ship arrived at one European country, so the ship has to be isolated. I mean, anchored on the public sea. Okay, so that practice just continued for almost 300 years. But just like what I mentioned, that practice, the quarantine is about 40 days. So the 40 days is associated with just the religion, just like what I mentioned just now. If you have ever read some kind of religious books, for example, Genesis, in the Genesis, the God want to punish people because the human beings committed original sin. And so the God punished people with flood. So the God flooded the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So that is the first association between quarantine, the 40 days quarantine with 40 days. And then the third religious origin of the quarantine, 40 days quarantine, is that it's about Exodus, Old Testament. Because in the Old Testament, Exodus, Jesus fasted in the wilderness for 40 days, a night of solitude. And then, because many people were religious, so adopted 40 days as a quarantine. However, those 40 days are not compulsory, because and each country they just follow the quarantine practice, but it was not compulsory. And sometimes those European powers, they have different quarantine measures. Sometimes they adopted 30 days, but most of them adopted 40 days of quarantine. And because of the differences in the practice among the European powers and a lot of trade dispute among those European powers, that's why they decided to have a lot of sanitary conferences in order to harmonize the conflicting and coastal maritime quarantine requirements of different European nations. And so in 1851, France initiated the first international center conference, and 12 countries joined the first conference. Actually, this international center conference is really epoch-making, because the first international effort to harmonize, to coordinate the policies among the European countries. However, because those European powers, they have different attitude, they have different policy preferences regarding the quarantine practice. So they failed to reach any kind of consensus, particularly United Kingdom and France. They object to the very strict quarantine measures supported by Italy, other European countries, because at that time, United Kingdom and France, they were big powers. They depended heavily on trade, on trade, because they have a lot of colonies in African countries and in East Asia. So they were concerned that the quarantine measures will damage their trade on the sea. And in the first international center conference, all the 12 countries, they sent a delegate to the conference. Actually, the delegate was composed by a physician and diplomat. From this kind of a component of a delegate, we can know that it's really, really hard for us to separate public health and politics. And so, and then later, in the next years, 5 century conferences were held, but unfortunately, there was any kind of fruit. Eventually, in 1892, France initiated the seventh International Century Conference, and so on this conference, those European powers, they reached a consensus. So that is the first International Central Convention. So this kind of convention only addresses cholera. So it's not a comprehensive convention. It's very specific. It's very disease specific. And then in the following years, for example, 1893 or 1894, 2 additional conventions related to cholera were held by the European powers. So in 1897, a new international convention dealing with prevention of spread of plague. So there are different kind of conventions. They address different infectious diseases, just like what I mentioned, cholera and plague and other yellow fever, etc. So those different conventions, I think, brought a lot of inconvenience for the international community to address global health crisis. So in 1907, those European powers, they just held another international century conference. So all the three conventions were consolidated into a single international century convention. So it was agreed that a prominent, so this is a single international standard convention, quite different from other disease-specific conventions. And so, you know, in last century, I mean, in the early 19th century, a disaster just happened. That is World War I. After World War I, before the World War I, after the European power, they consolidated, they just developed the single international convention. They wanted to establish institutionalized a mechanism to implement the single international century convention. And so the powers, they decided to establish a health bureau. So they wanted to create such a bureau. So that is what happened. That is what happened in Europe. And then in America, and at that time, United States was became a big power. So United States regarded the Latin American republics as its backyard, the backyard. So with the leadership of the United States, those Latin American countries, they established a new institution, that is International Century Bureau in Washington, later renamed the Pan-American Century Bureau. So in Europe, this is the international institution in public health in Europe. That is Office International Hygiene Public. It's headquartered at Paris. And so after World War I, in order to prevent another world war, so the international community established an international organization, that's the League of Nations. The League of Nations. The League of Nations and those powers, including France and United Kingdom, they established a specialized agency affiliated to the League of Nations. That is the Health Organization of the League of Nations. Of course, Russia, at that time, Russia was a member of the Health Organization of the League of Nations, because Russia joined the League of Nations. So it automatically became a member of the Health Organization of the League of Nations. And unfortunately, the United States was unwilling to join the League of Nations. So because, at that time, US President Woodrow Wilson, he is an idealist. He wanted to establish an international organization, that's the League of Nations, to prevent war. However, of course, he successfully persuaded the European powers to establish the League of Nations, but he failed to persuade his own citizens, his US Congress, to ratify the proposal to join the League of Nations. So United States was not a member of the League of Nations. And of course, the League of Nations failed to prevent outbreak of World War II. And after World War II, the powers, including United Kingdom, the United States, and the former Soviet Union, they decided to establish a new institution, that's the United Nations. So in 1945, all the winners of World War I, including other countries, so those 51 states, they just got together at San Francisco. They began to talk about the possibility to establish the United Nations. So on this kind of meeting, Brazil and China made a proposal. They proposed to establish a specialized agency to address global health issues. So, and then this proposal was warmly accepted by all the members. And so in 1946, the Constitution of World Health Organization was signed by representatives of 51 members of the UN. Although this constitution was signed by the members, but the constitution didn't came into being, it didn't came came into effect until 1948. Why? Because at that time, United States, although United States was a little bit supportive of establishing such a kind of special agency to address global health issue, other American republics, they were unwilling to join World Health Organization. So they just delayed the ratification in their lawmaking bodies. And so eventually the Constitution was ratified, was signed by by the member states of the United Nations. So the World Health Organization came into being. So this is the governance structure of World Health Organization. The first structure is the World Health Assembly. Actually, the World Health Assembly is the decision-making body of World Health Organization. It's attended by delegates from all the WHO members. The main function of World Health Organization Assembly, to determine the policy of the organization, appoint the Director General, and to ratify, to approve the budget, etc. So this is the first one. Second one is the Executive Board. Executive Board is composed of 34 members. So originally, those members are regarded as technical representatives. They are neutral. However, it's really very hard to separate the Executive Board from politicization. And then later, they were regarded as a representative from some member states. So among the 34 Executive Board members, 5 permanent members of UN Security Council were always a member of the Executive Board. And then other 29 members will be acted by other representatives of other countries on rotation. As the next one is the Secretariat. This refers to the headquarters of World Health Organization based at Geneva. And their regions, there are 6 regional offices and member states. And then the fundamental one is the country offices. And it unites World Health Organization sends some offices, just establish some offices in the countries around the world. But I just want to say that not all countries have the offices of World Health Organization. For example, only big powers, only big countries, they will have a single or separate office of World Health Organization. For example, Russia and China and United States. And other small countries, for example, Mongolia, and North Korea, they don't have a country office in those countries. And then functions of WHO, generally speaking, there are 3 functions. The first one is convention making. For example, the World Health Organization has made a lot of conventions, has made a lot of international laws. For example, international health regulations, Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And as a specialized agency in global health, World Health Organization is strong in its expertise. So World Health Organization is expected to provide expertise and norm and standard setting practice. The third function is that World Health Organization is expected to convene just the conferences. For example, when a crisis breaks out, and then World Health Organization is in the position to call on countries to have conference. So those are the functions. Of course, World Health Organization is facing a lot of challenges. The first challenge is that the power of World Health Organization is divided among the 6 regional offices, because all the 6 regional offices, they enjoy a high autonomy, independence. For example, the director of each regional office is not appointed by the Director General of World Health Organization. So actually the director is appointed by the regional committee, which is composed of the ministers of health of each member state within that region. So I mean, in terms of human resources and World Health Organization has no say. In terms of a budget or just the finance, and World Health Organization cannot oversight the budget of the regional offices. So in some cases, the regional office, they will challenge the authority of World Health Organization. So that is the first one. The second one is that World Health Organization is suffering from the budget shortage. Actually, World Health Organization, its budget is composed of two components. The first one is about assessed contribution. In blue one. Such contribution is donated is a membership fee of each member state, and so this part of the budget of World Health Organization is fixed. It's account for a very small share of the whole overall budget of World Health Organization, and the lion's share of World Health budget is about the voluntary contribution. So from this picture, we can see that the voluntary contribution account for more than 80% of the overall budget. So this voluntary contribution, how to spend the voluntary contribution, it's not in the hands of World Health Organization. It's in the hands of donors. For example, United States donated provide a lot of voluntary contribution, and United States can decide how the money is spent or where the money will be spent. It means that World Health Organization cannot make any kind of decision on the expense of the voluntary contribution. So this is the power struggle between the World Health Organization and donors. And the next challenge is in the World Health Organization is the politicization of World Health Organization. Actually, World Health Organization, of course, it's a specialized agency to advise global health issues, but it's composed of sovereign states. So it's fundamentally kind of politicized. It's kind of political institution. So without any kind of surprise, the World Health Organization is politicized. For example, Egypt and Israel. Egypt and Israel, both of the countries, they are located in the Middle East, but they are divided into different kind of regional offices. For example, Egypt was allocated to the Eastern Mediterranean regional office, and Israel was designated to European region. And so another example is North Korea and South Korea. Although those two countries, they are neighbors, but they were divided into two different regions because of just the political motivation, political consideration. And one of the most important, I think, very obvious phenomena of politicization of World Health Organization is about the Palestinian territory occupied by Israel. Actually, this issue was raised has been raised by the members in World Health Assembly every year. I was invited as a delegate of China's China's National Health Commission in 2016. So from a political perspective, I mean, I have a political background, academic background. I can know that I can see that all the procedure, all the practices, all the issues, they are politically decided. So I took those two pictures. For example, some European, the Arabian countries on this meeting, they decide to issue a resolution. The resolution is to accuse Israel of committing committing just the humanitarian crisis in the occupied Palestinian territory by Israel. So, of course, it's kind of political issue. There a lot of divide, particularly United States, Australia, and Canada. They object to this kind of resolution, and other countries like Israel, Arabian countries, including China and even Russia, supported such kind of resolution. I mean, to condemn the resolution, condemned Israel policy in the occupied territory. And so next, the challenge is the marginalization, because more and more players, actors get involved in the global health arena. For example, World Bank, World Health World Trade Organization, and Bill Gates Foundation. Those factors, sometimes they play a more important role than World Health Organization in global health governance. And next, the challenge, I think, is about nationalization of the United States, particularly when Trump came to power. He adopted American First strategy. That is, he's against the globalism. For example, he delivered his first speech on UN Assembly. He's claimed that I am against any kind of globalism. So, of course, World Health Organization is a symbol of globalism. And so, the United States and the Trump administration is unwilling to provide global public goods within framework of World Health Organization. Actually, some kind of survey has been conducted among the international scholars in international relations, and so many scholars, more than 58% of the scholars, they saw that the United States is much less likely to provide public goods. So that's why United States is unwilling to support World Health Organization because of the narrow nationalism. Of course, just like what happened in the past months, United States had decided to withdraw World Health Organization. Undoubtedly, United States was important contributor to World Health Organization in terms of financial budget. For example, United States is #1, and China is #2. United States account for around 22% of the whole size of the contribution, and China is around 12%. So, the United States withdraw the World Organization. I think it pose a huge, very formidable challenge for the World Health Organization. Of course, this kind of crisis it become more and more serious in the COVID-19 crisis. And the key, I think there are a lot of factors contribute to this kind of crisis. And I think one of the key factor is that there is a kind of mismatch between what has mandate and financing. And World Health Organization has a very limited budget. However, its mandate, its task, its job has been expanded gradually. So there's a kind of mismatch. And another reason is that United States just tried its best to politicize the World Health Organization, to politicize global health issues in World Health Organization. And so, for example, United States accused World Health Organization of being too close to China and having mishandled the COVID-19 pandemic. So United States, Donald Trump blamed World Health Organization for his own poor management in the COVID-19 crisis. And the next one is about the power struggle between China and the United States, because and the relationship between China and the United States is, I think it's just plummeted, got worse and worse. And so that's why United States also just blamed China. And as you know, after the presidential election and Joe Biden came to power, we expect some policy change in the coming Biden administration. And regarding the WHO's legitimacy in the COVID-19 crisis. And I think United States just played a very destructive role in World Health Organization. And both European Union and China and Russia, they played a very constructive role because all these players, Russia and China and European Union, they support they support World Health Organization. They expect to launch reform and to empower World Health Organization. And last night, China's approach to World Health Organization, and think China will just empower WHO, and because China just attaches great importance to multilateralism. And China supported World Health Organization financially. For example, China donated around I think 100 million US dollars to World Health Organization. And China also joined COVAX global issue initiative led by World Health Organization, and with aim to provide vaccines to the least developed countries. And China also support the leadership of World Health Organization in global health governance in different kind of multilateral arenas. For example, G20 and BRICS and other multilateral institutions. For example, the day before yesterday, and President Xi stressed the importance of cooperation in the fight against the COVID-19 in Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation. And certainly, China just emphasized the importance of bilateral cooperation to contribute to global health governance. For example, Russia and China cooperate very well during the crisis. In January and in February, at that time, the epidemic was very serious in China, and Russia provided a lot of protective equipment to China. So China appreciated very much. And later, when the epidemic spread to Russia, China also just returned its candidates to Russia. And technically, Russia and China also cooperated in terms of expertise. For example, Russia and Chinese research groups have actively exchanged experience in conducting clinical trials of vaccines. So I think all this bilateral cooperation will definitely promote global health, will help other countries to fight against the COVID-19. And lastly, and China I think China has already successfully controlled the COVID-19 domestically. I think it's one contribution to global health security, because epidemic or infectious disease respect no borders, and no country can address the COVID-19 single-handedly. And so China adheres to the shared destiny in global health security. And China just emphasized the importance of global cooperation or collective action. So I think this is the value of global health governance. It's also shared by World Health Organization. With this kind of value, I think the epidemic will be addressed very successfully. Hopefully, the epidemic will be over very soon, and then we can just conduct these academic activities not online, just offline. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Jiyong. That was very, very interesting. And for me, it is almost a miracle that you managed to cover both historical aspects and very, very contemporary, I would say, issues. And thank you very much for also mentioning Russian and Chinese cooperation on COVID-19. I guess it is very important in the context of our school, and moreover, both Russia and China were cooperating with many more other countries, and do have cooperative approach on this issue. And both China and Russia think that the pandemic could start in any corner of the world, and it is a global challenge for us, and we should understand it. So thank you for highlighting this point as well, and for highlighting the fact that we are helping each other, and this is for our mutual benefit. So dear participants, as we had a very, very energetic lecture and very energetic introduction, could you please raise your hands or write your questions into the chat to Professor Jing. And that is actually your chance to know more about some aspects about WHO organization and pandemia as well. Well, as you are preparing your questions, I would maybe start our discussion with a point. What do you personally think of China's project of, not project, but the idea of common destiny and its relation to global governments and global health governments in particular, because during the pandemic period, China has announced some of these initiatives. And as you mentioned, there was large financial input of China to the global health governance. But on the other hand, in the Western media, we often heard that China is using this situation in its own interest, and even Chinese aid, which was very sincere, sometimes was assessed in a very, very negative way. What do you personally think of it? Can we overcome it somehow? And what does it mean in terms of global government?
Okay, thank you for interesting question. Actually, global governance is shared goal. I mean, particularly the good global governance is shared goal of each country, because many issues in the world today, for example, climate change and financial stability and impact disease, epidemic, and other issues, they are trans-borders, and so all the countries are vulnerable to those challenges of these threats. It's just like what I mentioned, no country, no matter how strong it is, so can handle this kind of those challenges. And for example, let's take the United States, for example. United States is one of the most important developed countries. And the United States is very strong in military power. If we have a look at the current situation in the United States, over 10,000 and over 10 million people have been infected with epidemic disease, COVID-19. Over 1 million people have been killed by the COVID-19. So such a strong country cannot handle the epidemic. So what if those epidemics just break out in the least developed countries? So I think it's a joint responsibility of all the countries to help each other and to address this kind of international or common or global issues. As for the shared destiny of humankind, I think it's a value put forward by Chinese government. The value will be the guideline for Chinese strategy in global health governance. And so actually this kind of value is similar to the ideas of other countries. For example, just like you mentioned, the European countries, they mentioned, common interest. And actually this kind of shared destiny of humankind just reflected the common interest of all the countries in the world, because we are so interdependent on each other. And of course, this kind of value serves the interest of all countries. All countries can benefit from this kind of global governance guided by shared destiny of humankind, and China is not exception. Of course, China benefit from this kind of governance, and for example, China is tried its best to control the epidemic domestically, and this kind of successful control help China to recover its economy as soon as possible. And other countries also benefit from this successful control, because and China and other countries, and they are dependent on each other. So it's a kind of a shared community in global governance. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that is a very good, and quite optimistic and balanced answer. We have a question from one of our participants. Eka, please, could you please ask your question?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eka Khurbaladze. I'm a postgraduate student at Lomonosov Moscow State University. First of all, thank you very much for an interesting lecture. Maybe my question is not directly connected with the topic of World Health Organization, but actually I decided to ask because due to modern situation, I guess in some extent it has a sense. As we know, China has a successful experience starting with COVID-19, maybe one of the best in the world, if not the best. According to official resources, yesterday or the day before yesterday, there were 0 local cases of COVID infected in China, while in another Asian countries, for instance, in Japan, 2,210, as I remember, local cases of infection had been reported. In Korea, there are more than 300 cases. In Europe, US, Russia, and other countries, the situation is much more difficult. We are expecting, again, total lockdown. In some countries, it already exists. So it would be interesting to hear your opinion on what does prompt China's success coping with this health crisis. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, you know, many factors contribute to the success, the Chinese success in the epidemic crisis. And firstly, you know, China has a centralized government. So China can just mobilize any kind of resources to control, to address the epidemic. For example, you know, in January, in February, at that time, the center of the epidemic is in Hubei province. Hubei province is a huge, large province. And so the central government make a direction, make a big decision. The big decision is that each other provinces of China, they are designated to have one city, one specific city in Hubei province. So I think that is the power of the centralist government. This is strong mobilization of resources helped the Chinese government to tackle the epidemic to COVID-19 very efficiently. And so that is the first factor. The second factor is that I think that is a little bit something about Chinese culture. You know, in China, you know, each individual is willing to sacrifice its own interest to the public interest. So during the epidemic, many families, many households, they suffered a lot. But in order to just help the community to tackle the epidemic, they shouldered. They just they didn't say anything. So that is this just because the sacrifice of each individual household, each individual's thing contributed to the success of epidemic control. And I think the third one is that, you know, in China and China has a very well-prepared public health infrastructure. Of course, at the beginning of the COVID-19 epidemic, you know, and the Chinese government didn't realize that how serious the epidemic is. But a couple of days later, the Chinese government mobilized any kind of resources in the public health to address the epidemic. And Chinese government also sent troops, I mean the Liberation Army, to Wuhan to have the province to address the epidemic. So in this picture, you can see this picture. This picture, I mean, reflect the exact high efficiency of Chinese government to tackle the epidemic. In this picture, is actually it's a kind of stadium, a huge stadium. And Chinese government built such kind of hospital, huge hospital, overnight. So that's about high efficiency of the Chinese government. So I think all the factors just result in the successful control of COVID-19. Of course, China's success in the control of COVID-19 is, I think, is a good example. Actually, World Health Organization also just praised the Chinese policy. For example, Tendros said that China set good standards in the fight against the COVID-19. So this, I think, is a good practice. So that is my response to your question. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Jing. And I guess everyone actually is thinking, or maybe not everyone, but there are some thoughts about the efficiency actually of government structures in Asia, not maybe only in China, but also in Japan, in South Korea, and how is it connected to cultural traditions, and maybe some institutions that were considered perfect and very efficient were not so efficient in the pandemic times, but China was. And I guess we have other dimension of global governance here as well. Another question is from Vladimir. Vladimir, could you please?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. My question concerns the immunity certificates or immunity passports, as they call them, which may become a real dimension of management. My question is, it relates to the withdrawal of the US from the World Organization. With the withdrawal of the US, what kind of interaction in the World Health Organization can we expect? Will it be a sufficient institution to set up standards for those certificates or passports? And can we potentially expect that in the West there may be certain standards for those certificates, and well, in the rest of the world there will be some difficult ones? So my question about well, withdrawal of the US and how it affects the immunity certificates and the role of the World Health Organization in this context.
Okay, thank you for the question. Actually, the US withdrawal from World Health Organization, I think it's really unprecedented challenge for World Health Organization. And because, in the history of World Health Organization, no country has withdrawn from World Health Organization. I think this kind of withdrawal poses two challenges for World Health Organization. The first one is about financial challenge, just like what I mentioned. US is the biggest donor of World Trade Organization, not only in assessed contribution, but also in just voluntary contribution. And World Health Organization suffered a lot financially. For example, I think in March or in April, World Health Organization initiated a proposal. So the international community should just build a foundation to help the least developed countries in African countries, the 13 African countries, in case of COVID-19 were spread in the 13 least developed African countries. Unfortunately, World Health Organization failed to raise such a huge sum of money. So US withdrawal from World Health Organization just make the financial situation World Health Organization worse. So that is the first one, financial challenge. A second one, I think, is about just a political challenge. So in World Health Organization is an international institution. If the biggest player, if the most powerful country in the world is not a member of an international organization, I think it's a wishful thinking for us to expect the organization work very well. Let's take the League of Nations, for example. After World War I, the League of Nations was established to prevent World War II. And United States, was unwilling to join League of Nations. I mean, it's kind of isolationism of the United States. So this kind of withdrawal is, I think, such a political challenge for World Health Organization because World Health Organization will lose political support from member states to function very well. That is particularly true in the world today because all the countries are connected, and the United States is, it's the biggest economy. It's a country with a huge population. So it's really very hard for World Health Organization to run very well without the United States. And hopefully, John Biden will just come to power. And John Biden, he acted as Vice President of when Obama was in power. And John Biden, he acted to adopt multilateralism instead of a very narrow American first mindset of Donald Trump. So John Biden has already declared that he will just return to World Health Organization once he comes to power. So there will be policy change in American foreign policy towards World Health Organization. Of course, World Health Organization, suffered this crisis. There's some kind of its own problem. For example, World Health Organization is a very huge bureaucratic institution, but corruption and low efficiency of World Health Organization. Even European countries is very critical of World Health Organization. That criticism is constructive, and U.S. criticized the World Health Organization in a destructive way. So if World Health Organization is back to work very well, and then some kind of reform should be launched within the institution. I think both China and Russia are very supportive of the reform, but how to reform? And there are not specific proposals about reform, but one thing is certain: reform is necessary and is urgent in World Health Organization. And once Biden came to power, and once the United States returned to World Health Organization, I think this kind of return will be contingent on some kind of preconditions. For example, the United States will make some proposal of a reform. And eventually, this kind of reform, a consensus will be reached among the powers, including Russia, European Union, United States, and China. So once those powers, those important players reach the consensus, a consensus on what has reform is possible. And then the efficiency of World Health Organization will be promoted. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Actually, we have 3 questions for you. Could you, I'm not sure, do you have time to answer them?
I can answer the last question.
The last question.
Thank
okay. Then please, Yu Qianjing.
Oh yeah, thank you. Good evening, Professor. I'm Yu Qianjing from SISU. I have a question about the COVID-19 epidemic. There's no denying that China has done a good job in controlling the COVID-19 epidemic, and the main resource confirmed cases recently are from abroad, and the main resource is those frozen food. So there's a voice in China now, like we maybe stop importing those food from abroad. And personally, I agree with this opinion because those food are not irreplaceable. And of course, I know it's a hard issue because this problem also concerns economic development and employment issue. So my question is how to deal with this dimension, how to deal with the problem between opening to the outside world and supporting other countries and developing economy and stopping and refraining from the spread of epidemic, because this is also the topic of our group work. This afternoon, I searched on the internet about this topic, and I could not find a satisfactory answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, you mentioned two aspects: the open economy and prevention of control of the epidemic. Actually, those two aspects, they are not contradictory to each other. They are supplementary to each other. And so that also emphasizes the urgency, the importance of China's help to the international community to control the spread of COVID-19. So with our successful control of COVID-19 in other countries, it's really, really impossible for China to focus on economic development very well. So that's why President Xi just emphasized repeatedly that the international community need collective action. But as for how to strike such a balance between open economy and successful control of COVID-19, I mean, in other countries, I think one of the measures China has adopted is that China will try its best to promote the accessibility of vaccines. China will provide the low-cost vaccines to those countries, for example, to East Asian countries. And China has also cooperated with other African countries and has a promise to provide vaccine to those. And so this is one of the most important measures that have been adopted by Chinese government. And second one, that China also shared expertise, share the best practice with these countries, and how to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So this kind of the exchange of expertise or best practice, I think, is very helpful. So, and third one is that, I mean, in terms of China's open economy, and third policy is that the Chinese government just encourage domestic consumption. That's called just the internal consumption, and so this is the third policy the Chinese government has implemented. But this kind of multi-pronged measures, I think, will definitely help China and the international community not only to recover its economy, but also help those countries to address the COVID-19 successfully. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. Well, there was a hot discussion, and we still have questions left, but unfortunately, we don't have time for them. Please keep these questions, and maybe we'll tackle them on our further sessions. Professor Jiyong, thank you very much for sharing this topic with us and your information. That was very insightful and very interesting. Hope we can cooperate in the future, and have a nice evening there in Shanghai.
Thank you, Anastasia. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.